Hey everyone, it's Vanessa Callahan, and I'm so excited to welcome you to the Calm, Empowered Parent podcast. Together, let's challenge the idea that parenting has to be perfect. We know that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to raising children, and while love is the key, it sure helps to have the right tools for the job. Raising resilient humans is intensely personal and even transformative work, and I'm here for it. Let's laugh, cry, heal, and learn together. Here we go. And we're here with Krista Lockwood. She's a mother of 5, and I'm so excited to get into this topic of decluttering in a way that really supports child independence. And Krista, something that struck me about you as soon as I started to get into your Facebook group called Motherhood Simplified, the group, is that you were just so refreshingly honest, and you had like children crawling all over you while you were doing videos. Not, but then they would go and like play peacefully behind you, and I'd watch them put their things away, knowing what to do at like toddler age and young preschool age. And I thought, this woman's really in it. Like she walks her talk, she knows her stuff. And as I've been getting to know you, Krista, I realized that you actually have a background of spending time in the classroom and working with kids, and before you had your own. And I guess one thing that struck me in our conversations is that you didn't like set out to become a decluttering expert. This is something you sort of stumbled into, but then like it really has become a central part of like what you do. And I guess let's hear a little bit about how you became, so passionate about the subject, and kind of what got you into it.
Yeah, I am passionate about it, which I think is funny because I never thought that it just wasn't even in my vocabulary. I think until like 2018. And actually, I decluttered in 2013, but I didn't really know that's what I was doing. So the long story short is in 2013, my husband and I decided to move from Alaska to Florida pretty suddenly in about 6 weeks with our 3 kids, and with we didn't have a lot of money to ship our stuff. Shipping anything from Alaska to Florida is expensive. It was actually
Mhm.
more affordable to just bring a suitcase full of we brought a suitcase full of toys, a suitcase full of clothes, and rented a house that was fully furnished and just kind of started over. So it was very dramatic. It was a very dramatic experience, but it was like the best experience ever because we never recluttered. And that was just a really big turning point for me because we had 3 kids, we had a house full of stuff, toys spilling out into like every corner of the house, quite
Yeah.
literally. Like I remember we actually turned the master bedroom into the kids' bedroom so they could fit all of their toys. And we moved our bedroom down to the basement. And in hindsight, I would never do that again. Never do that again. But I just didn't know any better, right? We had like the first
Yeah.
grandbabies, so we got a lot of gifts. First grandbaby on both sides of our family. Lots of gifts, lots of toys. Plus, we were new parents, so we didn't know what we needed or not needed, and we saved everything and we got really good deals on stuff. So yeah, we accidentally discovered the power of decluttering through that move. And then it wasn't
Right.
until 2018 that I was able to articulate it when I had our 4th baby. And I was a part of a due date group, which is just a group of moms who are all due at the same time in a Facebook group. And after we had our babies, they all started sharing how overwhelmed they were by things like laundry, dishes, toys, messes, not getting their family's help around the house, feeling like their house was just like a huge source of contention and like
Yeah.
overwhelm and burden. Yeah, and they couldn't figure out how to get out from under it. And so we did this thing called house tours where we would go live inside of the group and show each other our houses. And when it got to be my turn, they were all like, "Well, hold on, Krista. Like, how do you have 4 kids, a baby, a dog, 3 big kids, and your house is like clean?" Like, we agreed that we wouldn't stage the houses and clean up the messes. We just show each other
Right.
like what our house is, right? And it was at that point that I realized, like, I used to be like that. I used to be as overwhelmed as they were. And I used to have the never ending messes. I used to be really frustrated with like my family and feeling like nobody cares about cleaning up but me. Nobody helps. Like, it's just, I will never get out from under this. Maybe when they're older, I'll be able to. But I didn't feel that way anymore. And I don't know what happened. It was just like one of those moments where I was like, oh, that all stopped when we left Alaska, moved to Florida. We still have toys. My kids still have fun. We still are creative. we have everything we need, everything we want. It's just easy to be in our house, and it's easy for my kids to be, integrated into the house, and just ask them if they wanted me to show them some things about like how to declutter and have less.
Yeah.
I think one of the moms told me, she was like, oh, it was my friend. She was like, teach me how to declutter. I was like, declutter. And it just in my brain was like, that's the thing. That's what this, that's what I got to teach people how to do. So I taught them how to do that. And you and I have talked a little bit about it as well. But prior, like my first career was being a teacher. And when I got started to get burnt out from teaching, moved into consulting, and was actually didn't even realize it either, was teaching these teachers how to declutter their classrooms in order to support their students. Because I would get hired as a consultant for classrooms that were like ages 2 to 5 and wanting help with behavioral issues with kids, or classrooms that were just
Right.
deemed kind of unruly, they were
Mhm.
struggling. And step number one was me always coming in and decluttering their classroom with them. And it solved a lot of the problems pretty immediately, like overnight. Didn't solve everything, but it did do what we see happen in the home, which made it easy to troubleshoot. Like, where's the actual issue here, right? Is it you need some communication skills? Maybe these kids really do need additional support, right? Or maybe this is a developmentally appropriate thing, but they were surrounded by chaos, and so it spiraled into something that became unmanageable for the adult and the child. So yeah, that I think sums it up.
And this is so connected to what we're doing here at the Calm Empowered podcast, right? We're looking for creating calm and empowerment for parents and for the children, for the whole family. And I think that oftentimes when inexplicable behavior occurs, we're looking for answers. Like, what is causing this? Is it me? Is it my kid? And sometimes we stop there. And this whole piece of, well, but what if it's the environment? And I think of the environment in two ways, like a physical environment, but also like the temporal environment, like the routine of how we move through our day. And that's why I'm so passionate about working with the routine piece first. Like that's the first module in my signature program for a reason. And I think that this piece that you're speaking to about the environment being set up for child success is what I think of really does sort of like put to rest a few questions around where is this behavior coming from, because if we set up the environment and it solves some of it, or it kind of brings it down, but there's still something there, then we can look at what does this child need in addition to a streamlined environment and a smoothly running routine. And I think that's just so fair and wise to the child and to ourselves that, it's not just bad parenting or difficult parenting or challenges in parenting. It's not just my child has these issues, or, could my child have issues? Like, what can we do in the environment first? And I love that that's how you started with your consulting. My first thing would be show me your routine. And then we would do the classroom environment. So I feel like we have like this A side and B side of like the first level
Yeah,
of change. And it's so complementary. So how exciting.
yeah,
When I think about child independence, and so this is what we're here for. Like folks who have decided to listen to this episode, they want to know, like, what is it about decluttering, and like how can I set up this environment in a way that leads to more independence? And so let's talk a little bit more about like the mechanics of like why this works. So we've talked about decluttering can help resolve some of the behaviors, but what do we mean by that? Like, what is it that clutter does to us, and what does decluttering help us through? Like,
yeah.
to help us with that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll explain it, walk us through how we feel as adults in these kinds of like cluttered, overwhelming environments, because that's one thing I think that you and I both agree on is like if you've got to have some empathy and understanding of what your kids are actually going through. And sometimes that's difficult to do when you're an adult. You forget what it's actually like to have a child brain. But for anyone who walks into a room that you have a lot of work to do in, so let's just say a kitchen, right? You walk into your kitchen at the end of the day, you see stuff all over the kitchen counters. You see dishes in the sink. The sink is full of dishes. The dishwasher's full of dishes. You've got papers. You've got, if you have kids, you probably have weird things like socks and toys and like just piles of stuff right in front of your face. So you walk in there and you're going to feel that. You're going to feel, and we all have different thresholds of what we can manage and what overwhelms us, but you're going to feel, you're probably going to tense up. You're probably going to start running through like, oh my gosh, like I have so many things to do. I've got to do the dishes. Everybody's hungry. So I have to do the dishes before I can even get people fed, right? I've got to catch up on all of these things. And then you're going to start to feel very busy, very overwhelmed, very overstimulated, even very at the most basic level, visually overstimulated. It triggers these running to do lists in your mind. And then as you start to, speed up that thought process, you're going to start feeling frustrated, maybe angry. Somebody's going to walk in the room and you're going to snap at them because they're going to be like, I'm hungry. And you're going to be like, I'm just trying to get the dishes done, right? Before I can feed anybody. So for us as parents, like, we know what that feels like, right? And it makes it very difficult to, implement a routine around that. Like, how are you supposed to implement a routine around being chronically behind, right, on dishes or pointless messes in your house?
Yes.
And it doesn't feel great, right? It makes us feel chaotic. And then we lash out, like, right? Whatever that looks like, whether it's yelling, snapping at somebody, maybe it's shutting down, right? And just like becoming a brick wall and nobody can reach you, right? Like you can't even hear them
Yeah.
talking sometimes. So we know how that feels for us. And even as adults, that can be difficult to cope with. So our kids feel the same way. Imagine your kids walking into their bedroom and they just see all of this stuff around them. They see Legos, stuffed animals, hundreds of books, which can happen in a classroom a lot. I know it's kind of a sensitive subject, but so many options for things and they can't cope. And so they process that however they're going to, whether it's by getting chaotic with their body. I think about like the classrooms that I would do, like
Hmm.
with the 2 to 5 year olds, running, throwing, fighting, just trying to process like bumping into each other, like wrestling and being like just so overstimulated, trying to process it. Same is true for our kids. And so, if we can simplify the space so that it's less overwhelming, less overstimulating for us, it can make sense. I think that's one big thing for adults and kids is like some houses and rooms in our houses have so much stuff that we walk into it and we can't make sense of it. We don't know where stuff goes. There's nowhere to put it, right? Or
Right.
there's too many
Yeah.
places to put it, right? There's too many
Yeah.
categories and just gets really hard to manage. Like if it's hard for you as an adult to manage, it's going to be that much harder for your child to manage. And then we get these emotional things, these outbursts, when really you could make the environment more supportive and either reduce those, challenges that you're having or completely eliminate them, right? Depending on what is
Yeah.
actually going on.
And we can definitely underestimate the impact of how orderly the environment is on the children's nervous systems. And I've seen it with little ones. Like I remember kids joining the classroom community, and at first they don't know where things are and they don't know where things go. And that's part of the newness. And it was very stimulating to them, which helped them pay attention and be alert and curious. But they couldn't maintain that state. And if we demanded that of them, then they would end up kind of burning out and they would sort of start to melt down more easily, have these big emotions about feeling basically ineffective and ungrounded, in their environment. But then if we took the time to give them a really thorough classroom tour, where things are, where they can find things, help them remember where to put things back, and reliably it's there when they go to that place, that shelf, that
Mhm.
supply is still there. It was this very deeply settling feeling where they could relax, and all that sort of early vigilance and excitement would sort of mellow out, and they would hit a nice groove and a rhythm within the environment. And then we could address other things that were coming up, like their pencil grip, or learning to use their words instead of their hands. It was really hard to do that if they felt like the environment was unstable or chaotic in a way. And we're not saying like perfection. We're not like this is not perfect. And I think that's something you've definitely mentioned to me, Krista, that we're not trying to create an overly minimalist environment necessarily. Some people do like that, but I think that there's sort of this happy medium that you're striking a balance around. So, wondering if you could tell us about like what is the real goal here? It's not to become a minimalist. So I'm hearing like reducing overwhelm, maybe reducing these big emotions that can come up if it's too chaotic. But there's something else that I thought was really important you mentioned in a conversation we are having about, it really leads to independence.
Mhm.
Something to do with like reducing just the amount of like tasks that people have to do.
Yeah. Well, I think I just wrote it down because you said it and it kind of clicked for me. And I think where we overlap, you mentioned, I start with the environment first and then I bring in routines. You start with routines and then bring in the environment part. And I don't think there's really a right or wrong way to do it. This is what I know. And we've talked about this. I like talking about this side. So I'm going to lead with
Yeah,
this one.
of
But what you
course.
said was reliability, right? Building reliability. which is what you teach people how to establish is reliability with routines. And that goes hand in hand with creating reliability in your environment. So an example, I think you and I both have backgrounds in classrooms, and what you said is exactly right. They can go to a part of the classroom and they know what's going to be there and they know how to use it. They know like the routine around it, right? They know what's there. They know how to use it. They know how to probably not use it, right? And they know how to put it
Yes.
away. And we can do
Yeah.
that in a classroom, but we forget, I think, sometimes that it's really easy. And well, I'm not going to say it's necessarily easy, but it's essential to do in our homes as well, right? Make it easy for you as the parent to know that your stuff is reliably there, right? Where you put it. Because when it's not, it's frustrating. And I think about things that I've taught people over the years that I think they think is kind of silly when they hear it at first, but I'm like, I only have one place in my house where I change diapers. And a lot of people want to have it like in 3 or 4 different places so that they can do it wherever they want to do it. Some people can probably manage to, but I'm like, I need it to be in the same spot every time. Otherwise, I'm going to lose the wipes. I'm going to lose the diapers. I'm going to end up probably forgetting diapers in a random place. And that's really not good, right?
Yeah.
um,
You discover them too late later by stench, not sight. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I like
Hmm.
what you said about reliability, setting up your environment to be reliable for you and setting up your environment to be reliable for your kids. And one thing I didn't get to thank you for this, but thank you for noticing when I do live videos, when I had babies crawling all over me, that, I really did try to make it so that the environment was predictable and reliable for them, but it was predictable and reliable for me too. Like I knew at
Yeah.
an age appropriate level, I could block things off behind me and they'd be safe, right? Like it was predictable and reliable for them. It was predictable and reliable for me. And that made it easier for me to teach them routines, hold myself to routines, because that's difficult for me to do.
Yes, it
um,
is. And that's why training, right?
yeah.
And support. I wanted to talk a little more about the combination of reliability and reducing the workload of just tasks. So, one thing that we were always sensitive about in the classroom, for example, is how many activities we put out at one time, because if we there was kind of a sweet number, a sweet spot, like if we had too few and there wasn't enough variety or enough to go around, if we did too many, we could very quickly see that it became unmanageable. And when things become unmanageable to children, guess whose work it spills over to? The adult, right? Because we're the only ones who can come in and actually manage it. So I just love this connection that you make between reducing the workload and child independence. And I wonder if you could speak to that a bit more.
Yeah. So I think I would like to start off with just sharing a personal belief, which is that kids are way more competent and capable and creative and willing and have a big desire to participate in the world, right? And participate well in their world, right? They want
Yeah.
to, I don't want to say they want to please because we don't want to raise just a bunch of people pleasers, but
Yeah.
they do want to do well, right?
I'd say in our world, it's like really, there's a satisfaction of competence.
Yes. They want to
Yeah,
feel
and
confident. Confident is how they
confident
want to
and
feel.
feel confident because they're competent, and that's like
Yes.
what a beautiful combination. Mm.
Yes. And
Yeah,
all kids want that. All adults want that. Um, so I just wanted to lead with that, that they naturally want that. And I think if we can if we give them too much stuff, like it's just confusing. Like one thing that I compare it to is like if you go to a restaurant that has like 5,000 options of what to eat, you
mhm,
probably don't make a decision or you make a decision that you're not happy with. And the same is true for kids. If we give them too many things to do, they're confused. They are also interested. And like you said, they're stimulated by the environment. They want to explore things, but they can't go deep in their play, which is one thing that I think you and I agree on is that kids want to go deep
yeah,
into their play. And so if we give them too many options, it's confusing. They can't go in depth. They can't master their skills. And so when you reduce the amount of stuff in your environment, not only does it like reduce the amount of work that you have to do, like just imagine if you have one box of Legos versus 10 boxes of Legos, it's way easier to just clean up one box versus 10. And that's kind of an extreme example, but I've seen it.
yeah.
um,
Same. Mhm.
and the same is true for your kids. If you can just give them one box of Legos, like they can master their skill, they can be creative, they can do the work that they want to do, they can play the way that they want to play, and they can easily put it away, right? Because it's easy to see where
Yeah.
it goes. It's easy to see how to put it away.
Yeah.
And I think about like I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. They have a dollhouse, and people are usually sometimes mortified by the fact that they only have 2 Barbies each. And they're because people will say like, "Well, how do I organize all of these Barbies?" And they've got like 25 Barbies. I'm like, "Well, you how many kids do you have?" Right? First of all,
Yeah.
1 to 2 is fine, depending on how many kids you have, 3, I don't know. They're going to have more fun with that, and they're gonna be able to play more in depth with that, and they're gonna be more collaborative. Their storylines are gonna get
Mhm.
deeper, right?
Yeah.
And 1 bin of
Absolutely.
accessories. And that's good.
Absolutely. That's good. And I
Yeah.
I think we mentioned earlier around reducing workload, like thinking about if cleaning up 25 Barbies versus 4 Barbies is a completely different task load.
Yeah.
And I want to speak to the fact that, again, if there's too many, and they struggle or they refuse or they are confused because they're confused or overwhelmed, and then we end up doing it for them. And I
Mhm.
think you've brought up too that the frustration that comes up when we have to do things for others that they're capable of but they're not doing can be a really sore spot in families. And the other thing that we can reduce that is this frustration and resentment around, sort of how and when folks are contributing to cleaning up and helping keep the house in a tidy state.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, like, what you've seen happen
Yeah.
when folks, declutter, and then this frustration and resentment shifts, at least around, the mess.
Yeah.
Curious about
So,
that.
yeah, I can share like my version of the story, but I'll say that I see this repeated through all other mm, families and moms specifically who struggle with this. Because I get some moms who come in and their husbands are already on board and already helping, and
Yeah, they're
sometimes that's not the
partners.
case.
Yeah,
So for me, what I realized in hindsight was prior to decluttering, the amount of work that our house took to maintain with 3 kids, because 3 kids is a lot to maintain, even if you have 0 toys. That's a lot to work with, right? It's a lot of work. But we had more work in our house with the amount of laundry because we had way too many clothes. We had way too many dishes. We had way too many unnecessary gadgets that were meant to be cool or useful, but they really weren't, for probably even like 3 or 4 adults to manage on their own. Like, that's the amount of work that we had to do. We had that many toys. We had because I also owned a small school in Alaska. So I had like toys everywhere. And when I was dealing with that, I felt like I was the only one who ever cleaned up. I was the only one who ever noticed when the dishes were overflowing. I was the only one who was doing laundry what felt like all day, Saturday and Sunday, on my 2 days off, or grocery shopping, or just trying to get the toys organized, or do things like pick up the toys enough so that I could vacuum under them. Like, I just felt like I was the only one doing anything. And in hindsight, that wasn't true. In hindsight, my husband was helpful, and we just had way too much stuff to manage. So once we had an amount of stuff that was manageable for us, and this is what I see happening for moms, they realize, okay, he is helpful. My kids are helpful. They do know what to do, and I can remind them and show them how to do it. The actual issue that I'm having is that I don't have any time for myself. We don't ever go on date nights. We
Mhm.
never learned how to effectively communicate or delegate or set boundaries, or we need to set a boundary with a family member, or you know all of these things. And all of a
Yes.
sudden, now that the extra work is out of the way, you don't have to spend all of your free time on laundry and organizing toys and labeling shelves. You can address the actual issues that need to be addressed.
Yeah, exactly. What the powerful takeaway I have around this is when you have an environment that's chaotic, overstimulating, and overwhelming, it's possible that the frustration and other emotions that come up, even resentment, are misplaced. And that misplaced emotions piece. I just think, if folks are listening to this, to take a moment and think about what feelings do come up for you when you see things out of order and the clutter is there. And some of it is directed towards, like, I haven't gotten around to this yet. Why is my life like this? I know
Yeah.
better. Like, I know I could do better. But then yeah, like, how can you even know if there are other things to address if you haven't, like, just taken care of that layer of life, right? So I mean, I'm sold on decluttering. I love this. Reducing overwhelm, reducing big emotions, reducing the workload. Like, sign me up. That all sounds amazing. I think there's another piece too that you've been able to experience that I think a lot of folks are hungry or like hungry for more of this from their kids. They would love to see their kids play independently more. I'd love for you to connect the dots about how does decluttering lead to more independent play from your perspective, having helped so many families declutter?
Yeah. So I noticed it. I'll paint the picture based on a classroom story, and then I can talk about how that it looks, how that plays out in my house. So I remember in Florida, there was one classroom, the very first classroom I was ever hired to consult in. I went in and I did an observation for the day before, just a 6 hour observation, and it was intense, and the kids were intense, and they were very destructive and just doing things like shredding books. Right, and these teachers were so frustrated, and they're, like, basically saying it without saying it, like, "These are bad kids," right? "These are bad kids, they just, like, destroy everything, and they're so loud, and we can no matter what we do, like, it just doesn't work, it's so hard," right? And one of the most profound experiences, which might sound kinda silly, is they had this little library section in there like most classrooms do, or all classrooms do, a little couch, and they had this 2 bookshelves that had, like, 200 books on it, and I told them, "So many," right? Even you're like, "So many." I'm like, how about we put out" I was trying to convince them to do, like, 10 books on each, and for me personally, because they needed such a big reset, I was like, 5 on each would be good. They were so resistant to it. They were like, "No." Like, they already fight over all of the books. They're already just, like, tackling each other, trying to get the books that they want with and I didn't know how to articulate it at the time, but I'm like, "Just let's just try it. Let's just try it. If they need more
Hmm.
books, we can get them
Yeah.
more books." So we put 10 on each side, and the next day, like, these 3 kids came in there, and they just sat and, like, read books quietly for, like, 30 minutes just and that was it. And the teachers were like, "Oh my gosh, like, how did you do that?" I'm like, I would love to take credit for that, but I didn't do anything. Like, the kids were just doing what they're wired to do, which
Yeah.
is take an interest in materials in their world that they can benefit from, that they can practice skills with. And the same happened with the art supplies. They had like
Yes.
4 or 5 just like buckets of markers. And I'm like, just let's just try it out. And I only put out like 2 red markers, 2 yellow markers, 2
Yeah.
blue markers, and they're like, this isn't going to work. Like they're going to be bored. It's not going to work. And what happened again was like I think maybe 2 or 3 of the girls came up and they just colored the entire time together with their red, yellow, and blue. They had enough. They were able to put the markers back on. They weren't shredding each other's papers. They weren't, smashing the markers. And I don't know that there's really a way to explain why that works other than that's just how it works. Like kids are just wired to
Yeah.
do that. They're
Yeah.
wired to practice their skill. They're wired to learn how to use their hands, wired to learn how to work with each other, be around each other, to create things, to practice things, to experiment and see what works and what doesn't work and what they're good at and what they like to do. And so yeah, I don't know if there's a scientific word for it or anything. It just is what
Well,
it is.
there is an art to discovering like an individual child's small group of children and or just like a developmental age kind of like band, like let's say 3 to 6, their threshold for the amount of choices and materials that they can still be stimulated by, but also be able to manage on their own independently.
Mhm.
And less is so much more. And I
Yeah.
think that sometimes because it's available, like if you're like, wow, there's a 120 set marker set out there, that is a better gift for my kid than this one that's like the classic 8. And you're not, as they get older, that becomes more true
Mhm.
potentially. But especially with young kids, they have a threshold. And I think of it as a threshold because you can see the tipping point. Like when you surpass the threshold, you start to see they'll instead of placing the markers into the bucket, they'll take them and try to smash them all in at once. Like
Yeah.
something like that. Because there's just so many of them. Things fall over and then they roll away and
Mhm.
they leave the mess there.
Yeah.
Whereas if there were 6 markers and 1 cup,
Yeah.
1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
4, 5, 6, they can handle that, and it's actually interesting to them, it's satisfying, it's clear when they're done, and, having been in a Montessori environment in particular for 15 years, and we're always looking at that part of classroom design.
Yeah.
How can we have the environment do the work for you as much as possible,
Yeah.
and
And I have
teach
some
them.
home
Yeah, great, go for it.
Yeah.
Love to hear a few.
Um, so like with I think as parents, sometimes we feel like we have to do everything for our kids or we have to be like, doing things with them all of the time. And I definitely felt that as well. Like when I worked outside of the home, it was like when I'm with my kids at home, I got to be like with them, like doing everything with them, for them, like right there. And I think there's power, and especially in understanding developmental stages of kids and giving them the space to be able to be around you, right? Without having to rely on you to do everything for them. And so, like, when it comes to toys, and when I think back to like doing videos and recording even courses with my babies around me, there were some times when I would notice that their threshold, that like we would just naturally rise above the threshold because I would be trying to record a video and they're doing nothing but fight in the background, which some days, that's just what they do. But then if it was like 2 or 3 days of that, I would look around and I would be like, "Oh, it used to be we just had the dolls in here and the magnetiles. Now we've got dolls, magnetiles, Legos, like the little connector things. Like we have too much stuff in here. Reduce it." And they would like relax back into their environment, for my younger ones. But I also think about my older kids, like my daughter, who's 14, loves to bake. And we have our kitchen set up to where she knows like it's reliable for her. She knows where the like stand mixer is, all the attachments for it. She knows that when she's done, she's got to clean it up and put it away, just like I made her do when she was a baby. Well, not a baby, but like a toddler.
Yeah, a toddler, totally.
Yeah. And it's funny because I had this like flashback moment where I just, she's 14 and I just saw this like, baby head again, like toddler head, where she's
That's
like,
I always say they look exactly the same like right in here, like in the
yeah,
sunglasses. They're still the little baby. Like you can see
yeah. I'm like, I just see her as a little baby because she's like, it's so crazy that I can bake all of these different things, like different cookies, bread, um, even different kinds of bread, cake. It's all the same ingredients. It's just in
Mm,
different ratios, right? And so it just reminded me of like the power of simplicity, even
yeah,
for older kids, even for adults. Like we really don't always need more isn't better. More variety isn't always better. You still make cakes with the same ingredients that you make cookies, cookies, bread, pizza
yeah,
crust, all of it. Like
right.
simplicity really is powerful and we can do so much with it. And I thought that was so cute of her because I was like, oh, more reminders that like simple really does make life easier. It reduces your workload. You only have to have this many things on hand and you can do so much with it, right? If you just have
Mm,
space to work with it, right? Which I think is really
right.
undervalued too, is like if you don't have space to use the stuff that you have, then what's the point of having it?
I know that's why one of your modules is about surfaces and
Yeah.
because having those like kind of workspaces or just
Mhm.
spaces for things to flux on and off of. Otherwise, you have all
Mhm.
these things, but nowhere except like 1 foot of square foot of carpet on the floor to do
Yeah.
it. It's like
Yeah.
not a very inviting proposition necessarily, and definitely overwhelming.
Yeah.
But so this is the part where I always like to throw a little bit of skepticism or something into it and say, yeah, but
Yeah.
like because there are some common reasons people think they can't declutter, and they make sense in a lot of ways. So just to as you're listening here, audience members, notice which ones come up for you. Like you're like, yeah, that's my reason, or oh yeah, those two things. Um, because Krista, I know you've had people come to you and say, "Yeah, but this isn't going to work for me because." And I would
Mhm.
just love to hear some of like the common reasons, and for us to all kind of listen, and then we're going to work through a couple of them really powerfully as we kind of wind down the episode here.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Well, specifically for parents, the one I hear the most is that I can't declutter because I have kids, right? Because I have kids. I can't declutter because they need this stuff or they constantly need me or interrupt me or if I try to declutter, they undo my work. They don't want to get rid depending on their ages, they don't want to get rid of anything. They're very reluctant, very resistant to getting rid of anything. Maybe we've been led to believe that more is better. More means we'll have smarter kids, more well-rounded kids. And I like to joke that like your kids can still get into college and get great jobs even if they don't have every single toy, right? Like They'll
Yeah.
still be just fine. Um, so yeah, I think ironically, the number one reason that parents think that they can't declutter is because they have kids. But while all of those challenges are very real, right?
Hmm.
Our kids do interrupt us. Our kids probably will make a mess if we decide to go clean up a mess in the other room, right? If we try to include them and they've never had to let anything go, they might get upset over even just you mentioning it, right? And so you might feel like you can't, but there are still ways to do it. And there's still so many benefits, I think, to problem solving, like accepting the fact that as parents, like it's harder to declutter with kids. It just is, right? But if we accept that, then we can problem solve based on that, right? We can learn ways to encourage our kids to let go of some of their things. We can find creative ways to help them do this. We can practice the skill of
Yeah.
asking for help, like, hey, I would like to get
Right.
this done and I need a babysitter, right? Or I need to advocate for my needs and say, I need my partner to step up and help me with this, right? You might, I think sometimes with kids too, we just have to make short-term sacrifices, which might mean waking up a little bit earlier, right? Or going to bed a little bit
Hmm.
later for a short amount of time so that
Hmm.
you can get that big benefit, like that long-term
Yeah.
benefit, right?
Yeah. I've heard of families foregoing a vacation that
Mhm.
they usually look forward to in the summer, and instead they do a staycation with a local sitter or friend, someone to help out to watch the kids while they go through all the categories and declutter for an entire week. And at the end, they said that was actually, in some ways brought them more stress relief than going away, because there's also a lot that goes into planning and executing a trip with children. And so they
Mhm.
got to kind of put that aside for now and actually address it. And that could be considered a sacrifice, but I also consider it a smart move.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I do try to infuse a lot of that kind of positivity, not that like, not toxic positivity, but
sure.
finding the benefits and the gifts, I think, in being able to do this. Because really, I mean, it is a blessing to have so much stuff that you're actually burdened by it, right? In a
Yeah,
time where that's not true for everybody, right? You have so much stuff that you actually got to get rid of it. Like that in itself is a gift. But also I think it's just satisfying, kind of the same way that kids find satisfaction in problem solving and feeling competent. It's the same for
mhm,
us too. If we know that the way that our house is functioning currently isn't serving us, and then we solve that, like that's satisfying. That feels
yeah.
good for us. So yeah,
And
it's
this
not necessarily a vacation, but it's good in its own way.
and this connects to something that you were revealing to me, and when you said it, something really clicked for me around this. That yes, it's true. Like people say, "Well, I don't have maybe," like you said, just from having children, or maybe there's like, "I don't have time for that." So we just gave an example of how you can maybe hack that. But and maybe your spouse isn't interested in participating, and you're saying like, "Well, I'd be the only one doing this." But these all make sense to me. Like I've raised stepchildren. I've run a household with kids and another adult, and all of these ring true. But then you said, "But what the real reason is?" And it kind of comes down to this is a skill set.
Yeah.
And it's a skill set, and it's a project. It's not just like a you either have it or you don't.
Mhm.
And I think there's this myth around like either you're that kind of neat, tidy person or you're not. And we're here to kind of crack that open and say, actually,
Hi.
what's so Krista, in your perspective, like what is the real reason why people kind of stall out, even if they want to be a person who declutters and creates
Yeah.
that kind of environment?
Yeah. So I have two parts of this to share. And I think I want to start by saying that if you think that decluttering means that you're going to have a perfectly clean house all the time and you're going to all of a sudden become the type of person who is organized and neat, right? That's not necessarily true. Right before we got on this call, because I mentioned to you, all my kids are home today and my husband is home today. He's like, "So what's your podcast about?" And I was like, "We're gonna talk about, of course, decluttering, of course." She's Montessori. We've got a lot in common. I'm really excited about it. And he's like, "You're gonna tell him how this really works?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he points to my shoes that I did not put away. And my dishes on the counter that I did not rinse off, even though I tell the kids every day, rinse off your dishes. And it's because I I call myself explosively messy because I am. I just I put things down where I'm at. I am forgetful. I move in multiple directions all of the time. And the reason that I declutter is so that it's manageable, right? So that I don't
Yes.
frustrate myself and my entire family because I am this way and I do clean up my own stuff. I don't make anybody do it for me, but my kids do call me out on the same stuff. Why is mom's coat on the counter? Right?
Yeah.
So the first part is not having a solid plan in place. Second part is not having a way to hold yourself accountable and follow through. When you have kids, and you want to do something, it just is one of those things. Again, it is what it is. It requires more planning. Like you mentioned, you want to go on vacation with kids, like there's more that goes into that vacation when you have kids. There's more to plan, there's more to consider. There are more variables, there are more things that are going to come up that you didn't expect. And a lot of times, the reason that people say, I want to declutter, I need to declutter, I should declutter, but then they don't, is because they don't really have a plan in place. We feel like, I think, that, like you said, you're either an organized person or you're not, right? You're either a person who can stick to routines or you're not. And I don't believe that's true because it like decluttering, especially decluttering, is a skill. And once you figure it out and learn to be discerning about, being the gatekeeper of your home, what comes in, what goes out, what stays, what goes, it becomes more natural. But also on the second part of it, that accountability piece and that follow through piece, while you might still be somebody like me who struggles with that, you can problem solve. You can say again, like, I have to do these things. So I have to find ways to hold myself accountable. I have to find, people who can check in with me. Maybe it's delegating certain things. Maybe you really just can't figure out a laundry routine. And so you delegate out your laundry, which is totally okay to do. You think that you should be able to just do this when really you just need some structure around it and some support and somebody or something to help you follow through with it
And you've
until you
done that.
master
And
it.
what this was amazing about Krista. By the way, she has this Facebook group I mentioned, right? Motherhood Simplified, the group. And there's almost 50,000 people in your group, Krista, for a reason, because they're seeking ideas and they like these challenges that you create, that you then created courses. You have a signature course also called Motherhood Simplified. And it does help you have a plan and a structure and a way to follow through. And I guess I would just, we're gonna do this visually, but maybe you can talk us through too for those who are listening, just in audio. I have three pictures of examples, of before and after photos. And if you could just point out like one smart thing that folks did in each of these, whether it was an actual like physical thing or even the way they thought about things differently. Like I love the 25 Barbies down to 1 to 2 per kid. Like that's like such a, like I can see it, the 200 books down to 20. Like, wow. Okay. So help us out with,
Yay. I'm
and maybe
excited for
just,
this.
yeah, yeah, this is fun. This is, I kind of surprised you with this too. So I'm
I like
excited to
this.
just be like, here we go.
Oh,
So we have a
yes, I
before
know
and after photo here. Yes.
this was
Great.
Sienna. Okay, so this is Sienna, and she has three kids, and her husband was not on board with decluttering at all. So what she did here was number one, so she has a closet and her closet was way too full of clothes. She actually sold, I believe it was LuLaRoe. She had a closet full of clothes that she didn't wear and that she couldn't sell. She had been trying to sell them, she couldn't sell them. And so she had all of these full of clothes. She had this laundry basket full of clothes. This looks like more clothes. She has this big staircase, and her entire staircase was full of shoes. And then there was still overflow of shoes. So, what Sienna did here was realize that she had too much stuff to fit into the space that she had. And a lot of us have more stuff in our homes than will adequately fit into our homes. I noticed that when I decluttered my house and I held my garage sales and I had my driveway full of stuff, the garage full of stuff, the yard full of stuff, and then I still had stuff in my house. And I was like, no wonder I couldn't keep up with it. I really needed two houses to hold all of this stuff. So Sienna decluttered her closet. I believe she ended up donating the majority of her clothes to a women's organization, kept the clothes that
Beautiful.
she liked that fit her, and then she only kept what fit into her closet. She was worried about it because it's getting rid of, she spent a lot of money on those clothes. And she was also used to having so many clothes that having less freaked her out. I think we don't always have a realistic idea of how much stuff we need. or how much stuff we actually use. And so it freaks us out to have less. If you have 25 Barbies for your kids, it probably freaks you out to think about having only 1 to 2. So you can also ease this down. You can go from 25 down to 12 and show yourself that
Half
it's
it
still
first.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Nice.
I'm so glad you
I
brought
have
this picture out.
yeah. I have another one for you. This is more of an office crafting space.
Yes, this
Yes.
is a crafty mom. So, her name, I believe her name is Sarah. So, she is a crafty mom. She has this house or this room in her house that's dedicated to just her crafting supplies. And I love sharing craft before and afters because it's really applicable to kids. So if you have a craft room and you might walk in and see all of these unfinished projects that you have to finish, all of these potential things you could create, all of these maybe one day I'll do it types of projects right in front of your face. And that, I think we think it can be inspiring, but it's actually, for me, and what a lot of moms realize after they declutter is that it's actually discouraging because all you're seeing is everything you're not getting around to doing,
Yeah.
and you're feeling bad because it's all of the stuff that you don't have time for. And it's just constant visual reminder of how far behind you are on, right? Or how far you've let yourself go and how much you miss your old life compared to the life that you have now. And so I'm not exactly sure what kinds of projects she got rid of in here, but I do know that she was very happy to have like a simplified space that she felt like she could go into and be inspired in and like
Yeah.
get excited to finish the projects. She didn't do this, but there's another mom. We'll see if you have any of her pictures, Danielle, who declared herself she used to be the queen of unfinished projects, and she decluttered and she's like, all of a sudden I'm the queen of finished projects because I finished all of my projects. I think she
Incredible.
honestly, yeah, she got rid of a lot of them that she didn't want to do or just was like, I'm never going to do this. And
Well,
now she's,
overwhelm is one of those. So I study motivation so much, and it's something I love teaching.
mhm,
Parents and educators about. It's like, how do we, how do we have motivation without kind of beating ourselves up? Like, we don't have to push ourselves to have motivation. We can actually kind of be drawn into a state of motivation, and it can come from within. And there's so much satisfaction with completion that it really is a reinforcer. And overwhelm can take us completely out of the motivation game. It's almost reliable. Like you said about if there's too many choices, it's hard to make a choice. They did the study where they put out again finding the threshold. So for adults, it turns out if you start pushing past 9 choices in like a sample the chocolate, you get a free chocolate sort of display. So imagine you walk up to a table, there's 3 to 6 choices. That's pretty manageable. When they start putting out 9, 10, 11, 12 pieces of chocolate, the number of people who would walk away and not choose a piece of free chocolate, even though they wanted it, would go up like by exponentially. Like first it
wow.
was just one person, then it was 10, then like 100 people would go by in a day and would say, no, thank you, because it's just too many choices. So
Yeah.
imagine walking into your craft room and you literally want to turn around because there's just too much going on.
Yeah.
So I love this idea of just like having the environment invite engagement and activity. So I have a final photo for you. Let's see. Here we go. And for those of you who are listening, it's a picture of a bedroom. On the left are 2 twin beds, a big dresser, a wall with all these books on it and toys all over, a dog walking through. And on the right is a single bunk, a dresser, and another bed that's on the other side of the room, and the floor is empty of the toys and even the pet. So, tell us a little bit about this person's journey. Just 1 or 2 things we could, possibly
Yeah.
try at home.
Yes. So this is Sarah Potter. She's actually she's an admin of mine now. And I meant to say it earlier when we were talking about reducing the workload. She actually came up with this concept because her husband is military of making their house have an amount of stuff that is manageable by one adult because she spends a big chunk of her time
Oh, I love that.
parenting solo. So yeah, when we talk about reducing your workload, we talk about making it manageable by one adult, whether it's you, whether it's a babysitter that comes in or whatever it might be. But what Sarah did here, this was while her husband was deployed, there's a little toy thing here in the cabinet that you can see. They've got Legos and action figures and I believe like Hot Wheels cars in these. And this dresser is clothes and she got rid of a big majority of like these kind of like castle type houses that come with a lot of teeny tiny parts, and they look on the shelf like they should be really fun and really easy to play with, but for a
Yeah.
lot of kids they're hard to play with because their hands can't fit in the doors of the house.
Right.
Um, so she did what I tell parents to do, which is observe what your kids are actually playing with and not just what they're pushing to the side, not what they're throwing around, not what they're having around them. Maybe they're dumping it out looking for the thing, like you can see in this photo. I think a lot of parents are like, well, my kids play with all of this stuff. But if you take a few days to observe what they actually play with, you'll notice that they come back to the same kinds of things again and again, which is what she kept in this shelf right here. And they do have a closet where she kept some other bigger things. I don't know what exactly she kept, but she was like, a lot of these toys were just like teeny tiny, accessories, basically Barbie accessory type things that they just didn't play with. And what I think is really cool about this photo specifically is when you get rid of all of the pieces, like all of the big things that are just in the way, you have that space that we talked about. You have space to actually play with the things. And for kids, that's really important because they want to play with their bodies a lot. So they can do things like flip, and it's not a big deal. They can do things like wrestle because she's got boys who like to wrestle,
Mhm.
um, which was one of the things that she was dealing with. She's like, they just are like, they're so energetically intense. I'm like, give them some space, to get that energy out rather than try to
Yeah.
just fill it up with stuff that they can play with that they
Yeah.
ultimately won't. So yeah, I think this is a really great use of like the power of open space for kids with some basically tools, right? Toys are just tools or materials for them to practice their skills. So yeah.
I love it. So thank you for walking us through those examples. I think it just helps us to see like, and all of them had a plan. All of them had accountability, and that was really helpful too. And I bet that's a part of the process is identifying like what is it that we're aiming for. And maybe you have to start with just half when it comes to like 20, 20 some Barbies down to two or three. Um, and start with 12 and see what the effect is and observe again and then kind of take it in phases. And this is something you love to do for families. And so, if you are interested, check out Krista. You can find her on Facebook and you can find her on socials. She, again, looking for that motherhood simplified, and we'll have a link in the show notes specifically to be able to find her podcast episodes and check out her signature course. So, look forward to that. But before we go, Krista, I like to ask all of my experts that I bring onto the Calm Empowered Parent podcast if there was something you could like a message you could broadcast, like you could send everybody a sticky note or whisper in their ear, all the folks who are trying to, manage daily life with children. What is something that you would want every parent to know about decluttering?
I think I would just want to encourage you to be the catalyst of change in your home. If you really feel like your home is overwhelming to you, I know for sure as parents, it can feel really discouraging, maybe isolating, maybe like there's not a solution, but I really feel like decluttering and making your environment easy to be in is one of the most supportive things that you can do for yourself and for your family. And it has such a long term ROI that I would just want to encourage you to be that catalyst of
Yeah,
change and to find people who are excited to support you in that, especially if you don't feel like you have the support of your family, maybe yet, or maybe they just don't understand it. That I understand it, and I want to encourage you and support you in that
yeah.
because I think parenting in general just often feels isolating and confusing and hard. So that's
And your
okay.
community is would support it too. The Motherhood Simplified, the group in Facebook, like I dropped a question in there and I had 86 comments within 2 days of great ideas.
Nice.
It was
Yeah.
incredible. Yeah, I was like, I feel so supported and empowered to take action on this piece that I've been like, stalling out on. So having that community makes such a big difference. And you've really cultivated an amazing one that's very engaged and really is positive. So if that's a space that you'd like to really experience, please go check that out. And of course, our goal is to help parents feel calmer. And I think there's obvious connection here and to feel empowered. And so being able to say, yes, I can be the catalyst of change in my family, no matter time or money or spouse or kid willingness at this stage. That will come later. We'll probably do a whole episode just on motivating kids to declutter
Yes.
and participate in the process. And then there was one other thing I just want to leave our listeners with that you shared with me. I thought was such a high level tip that it needs to stay till the end. We really kind of have to wrap our head all the way around what's possible here. You said to me, do the things that will feel good to have done, not the things that feel good to do right now. And I thought that was really interesting because there's this way that you said it's self care. The one way that I think of this is, what will my future self thank my current self for?
Mhm.
Like it's like, oh, future Vanessa will be really thankful to, like present tense Vanessa, if I go ahead and just make that trip to the recycling center and the donation center. Like, even though that's not doesn't sound very exciting to me right now, but later on, I'll be so thankful to my past self. I love that. So yeah,
Yes.
just wanting to hear maybe your last thought on that as we wrap up.
Yeah. Well, I think as parents, there's just so much work that goes into it on an everyday basis. It's constantly responding to the needs of other people. And so a lot of times we want to just do the thing that feels good right now. And I think sometimes that is the answer, right? Sometimes the answer is
Oh
to
yeah,
go to bed early, watch the TV, eat all the snacks, whatever it might be for you. And I think other times the thing that's more beneficial for us is to do the thing that we don't really want to do right now, but we know we're going to be happy that we did it later. So when it comes to decluttering, like I said, it might be a short term trade off of like at the end of the day, when the kids are in bed, you're staying up an additional 30 minutes to do the boring, mundane task of decluttering your kitchen cabinets, right? But when you wake up the next morning and then a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, and it's easy for you to keep up on dishes, you're going to be so happy that you stayed up that night, right? So I think, yeah, sometimes some days really is the answer is just don't do anything at all. But I think a lot of times the answer is also do the thing that doesn't really sound exciting, doesn't sound glamorous, doesn't sound fun right now, but you're going to be really happy that you did it later, especially when it comes to decluttering. I see that a lot with moms. They're like, I don't want to do this in my free time. Right? But the thing is, if you do this now, you're gonna have so much more free time in the future.
yeah,
Like I spent a month decluttering in 2013, and it's a decade later, and I'm still reaping the benefits of like time, energy, having kids who are they're able to be responsible for their stuff in an age appropriate way, and I've been able to maintain that pretty easily. Like that's a gift. So like that's a one reason to
yeah.
do the thing that you don't really want to do right now, but
And
you'll
that
be really
reminds
happy
me
to later.
on so much of what I coach parents on in my parenting work is that, like, sometimes let's just talk about routines. Like, you put in 20 minutes to an hour now, planning, previewing, working through, making a chart with your kid, the process, the robust routines process that I lead all my clients through. And then you get to use that every morning. And how many mornings do you get to have that run more smoothly
Yeah.
from this little investment of time? Like, this is like, it's rare, I think, in life to find things where you invest an hour and you get back hundreds of hours and
Yeah.
a good feeling. And decluttering is one of those. It
Yeah.
really does have sort of a magic about it. The other thing I've noticed is that once you get started, then you're like, ooh, what else can I declutter? And it
Yeah.
can really just be about getting started and getting started in capable hands like yours. So, Krista, thank you so much for all of your insights. I feel like we have folks who have really, really requested this topic, and we've like given them a lot of great tools. And know that there's more. Go, hit up Krista for to check out her offerings, get into her group, listen to her podcast, check out her signature course. There's so many people who have benefited from your work, Krista,
Thank
and
you.
thank you for being here. In this space to
Yeah.
empower these folks who are here.
Yes. Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody who is here. And yeah, I just appreciate it.
As we wrap up, remember, there's no one size fits all way to parent. Keep nurturing those strong family bonds and watch resilience bloom in your community. You've got this. And if you found this episode valuable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You can also hop over to thecalmempoweredparent.com for current events and to grab your copy of the Calm Parent Strategy Guide. You can even learn how to bring our free and low-cost workshops to your school or community. Your support means the world to us and helps us empower more parents and children. Let's do this together.